This session is called Stories of Digital Transformation in Higher Ed. That's the wrong title for this session, sadly. I mean, it's a good title. It's a great way to start thinking about it, but it's really not the right title. Because really, after talking to some of these panelists in preparation for this session today, I realized that a better title for the session might be Stories of Cultural Transformation, inspired by digitally inspired efforts at campuses. Basically, digitally inspired cultural transformation. That is but unfortunately, that is a terrible title to put on an abstract for a session. But it really does reflect what we're going to be talking about today with this panel of experts who are going to help us understand a little bit more about how digital tools can enhance the higher education experience for students, for academic researchers, for professors, and even for the institutions themselves. So good morning, everybody. I'm Goldie Blumenstyk. I'm a senior writer at the Chronicle of Higher Education. Some of you know I also write the weekly newsletter on innovation in and around in academia called The Edge. And if you're a fan of The Edge, you can come up later on and give you a sticker for your computer. Swag. But I'm really excited today because we have three speakers who come from very interesting parts of the academy. They really represent a very diverse subset of the academy, and they can really they're going to be able to talk to us about cultural transformation, digitally inspired, from a lot of very interesting perspectives, including the classroom perspective on open education, a perspective from the operational level, which doesn't get as much attention as it probably deserves to get these days. And also, frankly, they bring their own perspectives, which are very different because they have a administrative perspective and a faculty perspective. It's sort of their own personal experience and their responsibilities are very varied. So I'm really kind of excited to start with this conversation. And I'm going to start with Vijay Kumar, who's in effect our host. He's the most local guy here today. The Associate Dean for Open Learning at MIT. That's one of your many titles, I guess, at MIT. So Vijay, a lot of people know and remember that MIT was one of the early pioneers with open courseware, and you guys have also been involved with this thing they call a MOOC. I think that's what they call it, a MOOC, yeah. So I guess I'm wondering, as you're thinking about how MIT has kind of started in this process with open education, what's different today in open education and open courseware than when you started? Specifically with, help us understand a little bit about how that has evolved over time. And I guess maybe to do that, you might have to start with a little bit about why MIT started with open courseware.
Yeah, thank you, Goldie. Good morning, everyone. And let's see, one of my many titles is all-around good guy.
Okay.
Open courseware was, this was the internet, and there were very interesting things. In fact, when you and I were chatting, we were thinking about what was going on at that time in this country when...
open courseware was like what era?
1999, circa 2000.
Okay,
so
like the dawn of the internet age. Yeah.
Right, and the internet was there, and people were saying, how should we respond to the opportunities, given our missions, to the opportunities presented by the internet? And at that time, there were a couple of institutions. For instance, I vividly remember Columbia had launched something called Fathom. There was something called Unix that had been launched, and our leadership at MIT said, look, I'm caricaturing this somewhat, saying, did we miss the boat? Has the train left the station? How are we going to respond to the opportunities that the internet presents? And we did what we do very well in academic institutions. We talked a lot. We discussed and we argued, and there was a Council on Educational Technology, which I used to help facilitate, and with some very good minds. And they said, look, in order to respond to the internet, we really have to think about what is the essential quality of excellence in MIT education. What's the value proposition that we have? And then again, a lot of going back and forth, and words that are very familiar to those who are at MIT, words like intensity, drinking from the fire hose. These are words that we associate with. And they said, yeah, what does that mean? Till people sort of articulated that the real value proposition of an MIT education was a very high bandwidth of interaction between great students and great faculty. Spent a lot of time recruiting good students. And that we were a research institution, and what we really liked to do was to bring the joy, the practice, the tools of research into learning, into undergraduate education. And at that time, circa 2000, we thought, for us, and for the faculty, they believed that the only way to deliver that with fidelity was the on-site experience. You needed people there to do that. And we said, look, we don't want to stray from that sense that that value proposition. So the best that we can do with the internet, given our mission of extending educational opportunity, influence, etc., is take a picture of that and publish it and make it available to the world. And that was OpenCourse.
In effect, a PDF of what you're...
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It was a publishing event, so much so, in all humility and honesty, there used to be disclaimers on the OCW site saying, this is not an MIT education, it is a window to MIT education. These are publishing of MIT courses. So that was then. Fast forward 2012.
The year of the MOOC.
The year of the MOOC. And you say, look, there are some interesting things we have learned about learning and about doing things digitally online without compromising this quality proposition and saying, in fact, I remember Anant, when edX was launched, used to say, these courses are MIT hard, is the thing, which means that the quality proposition might be expressed differently, but you're not abandoning that quality. So the big difference is that you can actually do interactive online with large numbers of people.
So interactivity is the main
Certainly,
difference.
interactive, and then we'll come back.
Yeah.
There are other dimensions that we learn.
Mm-hmm. So Julie, Vice Dean for Educational Initiatives at Arizona State University, and relatively new to this position, right?
Correct.
How long have you been there now?
So I'm also associate professor for math and natural sciences, and I served at Oregon State University for 19 years, professor in biochemistry, biophysics, and associate provost for transformative learning. So I kind of have these two different institutional perspectives, both with outstanding online educational programs.
But now at Arizona State University, you're particularly involved with a sort of an adaptive learning biology class, which I think is one of the two things we're going to talk about specifically today with you. I'm also very intrigued with some of the efforts that Arizona State's making with just changing the admissions paradigm for higher ed. But let's first talk about the adaptive learning class that you're involved with in biology. This is really different probably than the way you've been teaching biology for 19 years plus, so at Oregon State and the way your colleagues teach it. How do you sort of get the faculty to sort of adapt to this different approach of an adaptive course where they're not standing up there and lecturing every day?
Well, I think I use my own experience. So I've taught cell molecular biology at the 300 level for over a decade. And I would say back when I was in faculty ranks, I was the absolute worst skeptic when it came to digital learning, and I was against it, and I was against online education. And it really wasn't until I started talking to students and listening to students' experiences and what the students' needs were, and particularly mentoring of underrepresented students. And sharing those stories with me helped me to understand we needed to make a transition. And so we started experimenting with active learning within the classroom, and I started to see significant increases not only in the students' ability to succeed in understanding the content and the material and application, but also the community and the ability of those students to feel a sense of belonging. Okay, so if you think about adaptive, what does adaptive and digital do? What it does is it sets up active learning.
Because what you're first describing, active learning, that's got nothing to do with digital necessarily, right?
Well, it depends how you look at it, because to do active learning in the classroom effectively, you really have to change to a flipped model, and you need to be able to have content delivery in a way that the students come into the classroom ready to engage in active and applied learning. And so once again, you're changing the role of the faculty and their relationship to the students and teaching. So instead of students coming in and the faculty, my job is to share the content that the students didn't read in the textbook. What we do is we create an adaptive learning platform that allows the students to engage in the content It's a mechanism where it uses learning science to break out that content into manageable chunks or concepts. And the students can go through that content on their own in an online platform, and it has immediate feedback, individualized assessment, and remediation in real time. And so once again, a student described to me once taking an economics course, and she was an outstanding student, A student. You know, I would always read the 50 pages of the textbook before going to class. I'd spend hours doing it. I'd close the textbook after studying, and I couldn't remember or understand a thing that I had read. Okay, with adaptive, I can actually go through, I know what I don't know. I know what I do know and do understand. I feel much more confident. I can go into the classroom and I can understand what's happening in that classroom. Okay, we can actually translate this now into the online environment and into our open scale environment, or what we call low facilitation MOOCs.
We'll get into some of that.
It creates a much more positive experience for the student, much more engaging, it's much more fun. You can all actually try it out on your own. I've been doing our college algebra course myself in the Global Freshman Academy. You can jump in and just experience it on your own. So I mean, it's I think the direction that we're going. You mentioned our biology program, or BioSpine. This is an entire adaptive program. So once again, it's not just adaptive within the course. So you know, you're moving through a course and you needed to remember something back from week 1. It remediates you in real time. This is adaptive across the entire program. So let's say your intro to biology course, you learn about chromatin structure, right? Okay, but then say in the 300 level, you're taking genetics, and you need to understand how genes are being regulated, and chromatin structure is the foundation for that, but you don't remember what that was. If you're an online student, it could have been 4 years ago, right, before you took that course, and all of a sudden you get this real-time remediation in a personalized format that helps support the student in the mastery of that content and applying that content.
So the culture is changing not just for the professor, it's actually changing a great deal for the student.
Absolutely, and I think it really facilitates the team teaching model. Okay, it's no longer individual faculty members responsible for that individual section within their individual course. And depending on which faculty member you got has more of a factor in terms of whether you pass the course or not, right? Here we can actually bring the faculty together as a team. We can add in instructional designers, technologists, active learning, applied learning specialists, success specialists to actually create an entire team that once again creates this learning ecosystem to support the students in their understanding and development.
I mean, the team,
really exciting.
The team piece of this seems to me one of the more radical changes in how teaching is done than when not just when I went to school, but probably from 10 years ago a little bit. Well, we'll circle back to a little bit of that. Patrick Norton, COO of Tulane University. Patrick, when you came to Tulane, I think of Tulane as kind of riding high right now in sort of the admissions world and everything else, but when you came to Tulane in 2016, you were looking at a sort of a little different financial picture, some deficits, some reliance on letters of credit, and you turned to data to sort of start to think about fixing that. Just give us a little understanding of why data even.
Right, and just a little more context around that. So Tulane University, one of the great universities, one of the great American universities, located in New Orleans, Louisiana, has been under-resourced, under-endowed, under-reserved for decades, for decades. And I tell you, you really feel it when you go through something like Katrina. When you get hit with the existential threat to your university, then you turn to your reserves and your endowment, and it's really not there.
But just for context, it's still you have a $1 billion endowment. I just want to make it clear that we're not talking about a struggling. We're not talking about a struggling college about to crush.
1.4 billion. That is true.
Collapse. Okay.
Yeah, but when you compare but then you have a $1 billion budget, and we could argue about endowment per student, and we can talk about what our peers are going through as well.
Okay.
But once again, when you go through something as difficult as Katrina, you really realize that something has to change. And what did change is we're on a number of fronts on our business model. One was certainly around our enrollment model. We're now, talk about riding high, we have 42,000 applications as of last year, or this year. 13% selectivity, yield is up to 33%. We're in the back end of a $1 billion campaign, the Audacious campaign. Our fiscal situation is much better. You're absolutely correct. We were in deficit in fiscal 16. We were on lines of credit in 16, and we're now in a positive situation, positive margins, really in 17 and on, and we're off the lines of credit. So the good news is that, yeah, it's been, and I like to, in my role as COO, I call that modest improvement. Some may call it something else, some may call it turnaround, some may call it exceptional, but we have much more work to do, and really that gets to the business model, right? And it gets to the use of data. Right, so we're looking at a number of pieces of data around the business model. One is around retention. So, from a retention point of view, there's absolutely, we want kids to finish, right? There's reasons for that, right? There are great reasons for that. But also, when you're sitting in my perch, there's a dollar value to that, because every student that doesn't return is really cash flow, right? So we have now used data to put in early warning systems. Using a data warehouse, we just put our first data warehouse in.
What does that even mean, a data warehouse?
It's storing all types of data around a student. So we call it the 360 view of a student. Every demographic piece of them, and also their grades and pieces of information, so then when things are going sideways for a student, that folks in positions that can influence are actually going to see that data and get reports to do some intervention to allow that student to.
And do you also, does it involve some financial data too? Like, does
oh yeah,
sort of
absolutely.
a dashboard of financials?
Absolutely. So that's one piece. One is retention. The other piece is around we are an AAU school, and that means we're one of the 60 research institutions.
Yeah. Well, let's get to that research side too, because I think it's fascinating the way you're using technology and data in your research environment. I don't think we hear about that very much in higher ed these days. But just broadly from the data warehouse, how did that initial sort of look at data, what role did that, and maybe some tools around data, what role did that play in kind of righting the ship a little?
I'd say it has not been, certainly in going from 16 to now, that has not been the driver. What it's going to do going forward, that's going to create certainly more stability and more sustainability going forward. But what we did really to turn it around was the normal blocking and tackling of running any institution, looking at every line of your budget, looking at every line of your business model, and try to make changes. So whether it's from your enrollment management function, once again using data there, all the way down to financial aid practices, and all the way down to workforce planning and supply chain, which is another piece. Working every line of your budget to really come out of deficit and really into surplus and to have that cash flow.
But if I'm remembering right, you also told me you hired a CIO from outside of higher ed.
So the CIO that we hired was from the private sector, which met with a little resistance at first, as you might imagine. But what's interesting about
what perspective did he or she bring to this?
What struck me about this person, probably more than anything, is, and really had to step outside of the higher ed model, is think about the customer focus. So what came across from this CIO was his absolute obsession with the customer. Absolute. And when coming from the corporate side of the house, you have to be, right? Because the customers are really your lifeblood, your cash flow. So he was able to take that and explain how we turn that obsession with the customer into the obsession with who? Faculty, students, and really staff. And that really struck me during the interview process, something really important. And he's delivered on that, right? So the culture change, which I think you're right, that's really what's going through with all three of us, is culture change, has been quick, but it's a work in progress, right? So once again, working in a data warehouse environment, bringing lean practices to how we're developing new IT projects, is getting people from different parts of the organization working together, whether the registrar's office, whether it's provost's office. Certainly within IT, they kind of live this, but to bring different people from different groups to work together has been a change at Tulane, and I think that's been a positive change, for sure. Yeah.
one thing that struck me as you guys were talking initially is like this the mention of learning science. We hear that phrase a lot. We'll hear it a lot in the hallways out here today. And I never exactly know what it means because it sounds great. Learning science sounds so, but I'm wondering particularly, Vijay and Julie, what have you taken from learning science at your institutions, you think, and how are you applying it right now in a way? I guess particularly from the MOOCs, like
Absolutely.
that's supposed to be the great
warehouse
for that.
It's a very good question, and it also has implications to several of the comments that were made about adaptive learning and also scale. So I'll start from one of the things, we talk about large numbers of people now having learning opportunities. And I think it's important to recognize that those large numbers look very, very different. It's not about taking one thing and shooting it out to millions, but you're serving large numbers of differently prepared, differently able, differently motivated, differently located folks. So, and this is where this confluence of, and I know as Julie was talking, I was thinking about learning science, about data, and the fact that digital technologies allow us to operationalize what we learn from learning science and what we're learning from data to be able to serve different kinds of learners. So what do we learn? One of the things, and we have this initiative called the MIT Integrated Learning Initiative, which is led by John Gabrielli, who's a professor of brain science and cognitive science, and he studies dyslexic children and looks at their brain structures and say, what are the kinds of technology enablements that you can do to address the learning? And one of the things that really hits home when you hear John talk, in fact, he presented a keynote here last year, is the fact that you don't have to wait till a child is 16 years old or 10 years old to say, to recognize that this child is dyslexic and has a reading issue, when MRIs, fMRIs can detect that much early, and you can put in sometimes even simple fixes like large fonts, separating out fonts to address that. So we learn that people have different kinds of brain structures, but we also learn something much, much more operational. Sometimes I joke, my dad tried to teach me probability and statistics, and all I saw was an angry guy yelling at me, learn this, right? So now, because we kept thinking that, mastery was about the drill model, repeat, without feedback, without saying that, and so you find that there are learning curves, and one of the things that you find that we ignore is the fact that there are also forgetting curves. Right? So mastery and learning through rote, through that kind of drill, is about quick recall. You certainly, and we have data to show that, when you think about forgetting curves, that comes from learning science. The fact that you can have quick recall, but subsequently progressive recall is slowed down. So what you do is through displacement or through interleaved learning, through application techniques, you decrease the slope of that forgetting curve, so that downstream recall of stuff that you have learned is much more effective, which makes it,
in effect, it's bringing back more repetition.
And then Julie was talking about adaptive, so frequent formative assessment, right? The fact that you can look at data on progression and be able to take appropriate corrective steps towards that, that's one kind of thing. The most simple example when you talk about, when you look at a course now, and this is, this has come up when we were chatting before, is you have really, everything in the learning cycle is prone to innovation now. Your lecture is a 6-minute concept video, immediately followed, if you don't get don't grok a concept, maybe there's a visualization that helps you understand that better. Immediately, you can have a game-like environment where there is some testing. So learn, apply, test, this is happening with much less latency than we learned. That's operationalizing what we learned from learning science.
Mm-hmm. And do you see that in, I guess, how do you apply that in some of this adaptive courses that ASU is doing right now, Julie?
So I think what's exciting, so first of all, disclaimer, I'm a cellular biochemist, not a learning scientist, but one of my privileges at EdPlus is I get to oversee our action lab. This is a research and development group. It's a group of researchers who do have expertise in learning sciences. And so we're very focused on action. We're very focused on implementation in a way that's going to immediately have an impact on our students' learning and success. So really, I think we have high resolution approaches and low resolution approaches to help support our students. I think our high resolution approach that I'd like to share now is college algebra. And so have a close collaboration with McGraw-Hill ALEX. This is an adaptive platform to support students in success in learning algebra. But what we do is we kind of look at the data. So if you look at that course, there are 370 learning events, okay, as the students are going through that algebra course. We can actually monitor each individual student in real time as they're progressing through those 370 learning events. We will run a nightly machine learning analysis, okay, on all of those students, and we can examine the patterns, and we can tell by week 1 of the course with greater than an 80% accuracy which students are not on track to be successful in that course. And so once again, we're creating this daily list where we can share that information with our tutoring center. Okay, once again, they're specialists in reaching out and engaging those students and supporting those students. We also share that information with the instructors who can do their own outreach, but it really has helped in terms of informing our pedagogy. So a simple thing that we learned was that students were progressing through that course, but they're getting towards the end of the course, and that's where the most difficult concepts are. And that's where we were losing many of our students. So all we did simply was to compress the first half of the course into the first third of the course and expand the second third, the more difficult parts of the course, out into that, give them 50% of the course. Another example is we can actually use the machine learning analysis to identify the most difficult topics or pain points for the students as they're moving through that progression. So now we know exactly where the students are going to have their greatest challenges. Some of this faculty knew anyway, high quality faculty know through intuition, but this actually puts the data behind it. It allows you to prioritize resources to target those specific pain points. So you can create real-time resources to support the students, and then resources that the faculty can actually apply through online learning or in the classroom. And so that's really exciting. I mean, we've increased success in some of our college algebra sections by over 20%.
And to the point to culture, I mean, I know ASU has a very active and tutoring center with a very sophisticated operation there. Do you tune this to the? I mean, you're tuning it back to the tutoring center. They kind of know when the rush periods are going to be, right?
Good question. I would say that relationship is developing, but we do have internally a great success coach group within EdPlus, and once again, we can share information and engage them so that they know how to best support students. And once again, students call in and say, wow, this is hard, I'm struggling, and once again, those coaches know what's going on, they understand that environment, and they're able to provide a different type of support to our students.
And just so I understand, I think a lot of people in the room have been hearing about adaptive learning for years and how it allows the application of this learning science in real. But I'm just trying to understand, like, what time period was this that you sort of looked at the course and tried to understand, oh, we need to shift the third to a half, you know, and sort of, was this done in 1 year, over the course of several years?
Oh, wow, great question. Arizona State has been working on this for several years. I think early on, it had to do with the open scale environment, Global Freshman Academy, working with Newton as a partner. And then over time, they transitioned to ALEX. And ALEX is really just probably the best adaptive algorithm-based platform that I've ever seen. And so once again, we've developed that. It's a combination of both active and adaptive. So our greatest success has been in our on-campus courses where they're implementing the active community-based learning. And we're now starting to translate that into our online environment, but still just with implementation of the platform alone, we're seeing probably 10–12% increases in success of our students. Some of this it comes from things as simple as just having structure, okay, for the students, having a more engaging environment, and then that immediate feedback and remediation as they're moving through the course.
I mean, and it's important to note that, I mean, Arizona State is willing to work with You work with Cogbooks, you work with Alex, you worked with Newton, you've got a lot of these relationships with a lot of companies.
We're not going to wait for someone to develop success for our students. We're going to go out and engage them and help create the solution.
Julie, may I interrupt?
Yes.
So in this, it's also conceivable that as you find out about points of weakness or conceptual difficulties students, they can be directed to other resources online also for that remediation or for that increasing likelihood of success.
Oh, absolutely. And that's what knowing where those points are allows us to set that up in advance.
Right.
And once again, we do not hesitate to direct students out to YouTube, for example. And that's a great resource as students in this generation. My kids, they'll tell you, they spend a lot of time, they go to YouTube first.
Too much.
And they've trained me, go to YouTube first. And so once again, it's creating
This open-
a quality environment within YouTube, something that's branded so that they know they can trust it.
So it's a different definition of kind of where the expertise is. Hey, Patrick, I'm wondering, I wanted to go back to what you were starting to talk a little bit about the research environment at Tulane and how you're using digital tools to sort of reshape that. That's not something we hear as much about in higher ed.
Right. So as we emerged out of Katrina and started to reinvest into our research footprint, and by the way, under President Fitz, he's kind of double, triple down on that investment. So science and engineering, and also our medical platform and research that goes along with it. We have a whole downtown campus that we're investing in and expanding. And we are a member of the AAU, so the American Association of Universities, about 60 universities that are research intensive. And there are a number of criteria that are measured as a member of the AAU. One of it is, of course, research funding. Another one is federal funding. One is citations, and another one is awards and honors. And we've used data to see where we stack up in the pecking order.
Do you use it to direct where you're investing too?
Not so. First of all, we're trying to figure out where we are in the landscape, right? But also, it has been helpful in investing. And by the way, where we're investing is kind of where everybody's investing: science and engineering, and also medicine. And so it's been helpful to look at our data, measure ourselves against others, of course, and see where we need to make the investments. And it's in medicine mostly, but also science and engineering. And using those tools has been purposeful in our hiring. So and we've hired a number of research faculty over the past year to kind of increase our investment in this platform. Yeah.
I mean, it just strikes me as interesting because just in the same way that technology is kind of changing the role of the professor in the classroom, there seems like at some role technology and data may be affecting the research work that the professors are doing.
Absolutely, and then when you think about the back office side of it, so there's one thing is getting the information as to where we are and where we should be going. But then there's the back office. I mean, once again, Goldie, I think you mentioned earlier, it's the business model doesn't get a lot of play, right? But think about the life cycle of a grant, from an idea to all the way to submission to actually award, to make that seamless, to make sure that that's effective, make sure that all the faculty, all the researchers are working together to get that proposal in on time and with the budget that makes sense is extremely important as you're competing against others. So Tulane is actually embarking right now on an evaluation of our research footprint from pre-award to post-award to see how we can. We've been talking about best in class and world class a lot around Tulane. So everything we want to do is really around world class and best in class. And we're trying to develop now the best in class, world class pre-award to post-award function around research. So it's not just the data coming in to inform us of where to invest, but it's also how do we actually execute on that once we're able to find the areas to invest in.
Does it make it? Do you think that has implications for does that going to help you recruit better faculty members?
Absolutely. So we've been. This is a good thing. So we've been struggling with why Tulane is so hot, and of course New Orleans has a draw, Tulane University has a draw, but I think the investment we're making in not only the things you can see, which is around research facilities and around the data around where we are and where we should invest, and making these investments and showing it. But also this investment in the back office where the pain points are with faculty and researchers. I mean, there's so much pain and around submitting grants sometimes that that could turn some faculty off, especially if they hear it through the grapevine that this institution is not a good place to do research, or at least submit grants.
Yeah. So it really ties back to reputation at some level.
Absolutely.
Yeah, just to jump in real quick. So, I mean, as we're talking about research, I think something that's really important, and I'd like to take us, in a direction in the future, is integrating more of this cutting-edge research from our faculty into the classroom, into the learning experience. I think as we're moving to this team model, it's a way to kind of create the space for faculty to really come in and share what they're best at. And once again, give students that full experience that's going to really transform their learning and their thinking and give them a competitive advantage as they're moving forward.
What does it take to, I mean, I think faculty have generally been comfortable about bringing their research into the classroom more on their own, though. Not so much in the team environment. I'm really, as I've been thinking about this as we're talking, it strikes me as just the way this technology is enabling more team teaching, it's enabling more different kinds of relationships between the student and the institution.
Absolutely. In fact, I'm listening to the business model. 2 points. One, about 7-8 years ago, our president launched something called the Task Force on the Future of Higher Education. And that was to sort of acknowledge the fact that, look, folks, it's not business as usual. We've been doing technology, all of us have been, around the edges. Now it's become central to the discourse on change. What does it mean for residential education? And you pointed out the implications. What does it mean for the business of doing education? What does it mean for our relationship with the rest of the world? How do we impact? So it's the thing. So when we talk about transformation, I was looking at the title of this. I mean, transformation, you can have doing old things in new ways, or you can be doing new things in new ways. And I think we're all edging around these new things in new ways, and which means real structural change, which is what I would call disruption, structural change. When we talk about open, in the early days of open, we talk about how the relationship between access, cost, and quality has been disrupted. You don't, the old suggestion that if you had great access, quality would diminish. If you had great quality, cost will be disproportionately high. That proposition has been challenged. Now we see that the relationship between the learner, the institution, and credential. In fact, I was struck when Julie was talking about finishing, because even finishing your program has a new meaning. You might modularize it. You might
you might just finish in a micro form, right? Yeah.
So the learner. So one of the things that we find is, I'll give an example from the edX course, the first one that Jerry and Anant and people taught. You're teaching. There are 2 instructors, 3 TAs, and 600,000 people. The numbers, give or take. Within a week, you find out that there are 300 communities. So it's not a one-to-many relationship, as you'd imagine, or a few-to-many. It's a many-to-many relationship. The learning ecosystem is not about you and them. It is about them. So it's that collaboration is not just happening. It's not just team teaching, right? And the team, again, for the teaching side, is a whole ecosystem of providers. When you, based on your data, as Julie was describing, are sending people off to other resources, be it YouTube or Khan Academy, suddenly they are part of your teaching ecosystem, of your supply ecosystem. And over there, the communities of learners that are forming, they are part of the learning ecosystem. So, I mean, it's all these, the structural changes, that really speaks to the kind of transformation that we are beginning to see a glimpse of.
So I see we're running out of time. I have 2 more sort of questions I want each of you to answer. I mean, kind of on the quick side here, if you can. First question is, what did it take to do digital transformation 5 or 10 years ago compared to what does it take now when we're sort of a more digitally enabled society, institutions, and what might it take in the future? So I'm just trying to sort of understand the transition here of how, what this conversation would have sounded like 10 years ago versus today, and what it's going to sound like in 5 years, maybe.
So I guess the way I look at Arizona State, so I'm coming in new, it gives me this great, unique perspective, and what I see is leadership and culture. And it really goes all the way back to the charter. And Arizona State has made a commitment. We do not want to be a university measured by whom we exclude, but by whom we include and how they succeed. And once again, that permeates down from the president and the provost all the way down to the faculty. And it is an entirely a unique culture, something that I've never seen before. And it is the driver. And then once again, bringing in individuals who have those values and are committed to that, and then have the skills, and working in teams, you can actually move that forward in terms of a transformation. That's what I've seen with Arizona State in doing that. They're not afraid to fail, so fail fast. Build the plane as you're flying it, okay? You know, at other institutions that I've worked at, it was let's talk the ideas to death and never actually do anything,
So we're
or
hearing-
death by pilot.
So we're hearing speed and culture. Patrick.
Yeah, so there's an old saying, right? There's no technical solutions to social issues, right? And I really believe that. So when you think about, and I'm piggybacking, Julie, what you just said about leadership and about vision and about collaboration. So Tulane University was founded 175 years ago by 7 doctors to do what? To combat yellow fever. It was the rage in the port and really in port cities, and they came together to form the university. Fast forward 175 years, and what's happening? The head of the primate center, the head of public health, the head of the school of medicine are working together to do what? To find a solution for the coronavirus. And that's about collaboration, that's about leadership, that's about hiring the right people. So I'd say technology is everywhere, and it's an easier tool to access. But the issue around the social issues, around making sure people collaborate, that there's interdisciplinary work going on, is really critical.
Okay,
the
Vijay,
work.
quick, and then because we have one last question.
So I'll talk about, because you referred to me as the oldest guy on the phone over here. What it used to take was to demonstrate compelling value to faculty and students that this makes a difference, and which is not by folks like me saying, look, this is going to be great, but peers.
Right.
Since you create those conditions, what it's going to take, and you've talked about, I'm going to agree with what has been said about supporting innovation in education, but it's not just supporting the front end of innovation. It's to create the organizational technical infrastructure so that can be sustained attention to that. I mean, we run something called the World Education Lab, Jameel World Education, exactly to do that. It's capacity building.
Okay. So
innovation.
my last question would have been, what's missing in the ecosystem right now that some of these entrepreneurs here might be able to fix? But we're out of time. So I'm going to let the we have 2 minutes. We get a dispensation?
Yes.
2 minutes dispensation. We're going to go down the line again. What's missing from your perspectives in the ecosystem right now? There's a lot of entrepreneurs out here in the room who are begging to break into this industry or grow their businesses. What do they need to know?
They need to know that it's people and communities who adopt. Right? It's not about the toy, the sexy application, that it takes a system to change, which is about, and therefore they need to be engaging with the adopters. And by the way, some of these are old lessons of innovation diffusion, and this is not rocket science, but you have to pay attention and engage folks, in the whole systemic process of change.
Patrick?
Yeah, no, I have a specific ask. It's around supply chain and purchasing, right? So higher ed, as you might imagine, it's variable in the way we run our supply chain. And if there are solutions, technology solutions, that can get at that using AI, using maybe auctions, stuff that the private sector is probably all over right now, and deployed it to higher ed. And as Goldie said, there are 4,000 college universities out there, and it's very variable. Some are in bad shape financially, and any edge they can get in their business model is really helpful. So I would say that's a specific ask around, if you're out there thinking about something you should focus on that is a crying need, I believe, in higher education, is kind of that part of the business model.
Julie?
I think we need to see an increase in university and corporate partnerships, both in terms of educational technology, but also in terms of providing educational benefits and different ways of access and success for our students, very similar to what we've developed with Starbucks, Uber, and now with InStride.
Great.
Goldie, may I take 1 second?
I don't know if she's going to let us do it.
This is just to, because I think it's important to emphasize, in all this talk about change and this thing, I think one of the things that all, because you said this is a message to all EdTech entrepreneurs and so, is to really help people think about what is it that you want to keep. There's lots of the quality things, active learning, et cetera, and you really want to think about what is it that you want to preserve and extend.
Great. Ladies and gentlemen, join me in thanking this panel. Thank you all for coming.
Well done.
Yes, great.